We are talking to our resident detective doctor, Dr. Aaron Hartman. He's been here on multiple episodes, and we're diving into mitochondria, minerals, and the connection to behavior and things that are really overlooked. And what I have found to be incredibly helpful in my work, and I know it is with you, Dr. Hartman. Parents often hear about vitamins but minerals and mitochondria feel very abstract. And in fact, some of my most intelligent parents are like, what's this mitochondria? Can you, in plain language, really explain what mitochondria, what are they, why is it so important, and how does it affect a kid's behavior and moods?
Well, mitochondria are basically the powerhouse of your cells. They make the majority of energy for your cells. And what we've learned is actually pretty much every chronic illness, even death itself, we're learning is actually dysfunction in the powerhouse of the cell, which is the mitochondria. To put this in perspective, your body in your weight, you recycle mitochondria at such a rate, about 80% of your body in weight is recycled in mitochondria every day. So if there's anything off just a little bit, you have a nutrient deficiency, a mineral deficiency, fatty acid deficiency, toxin that affects how the mitochondria work. And that 80% of your body weight a day is recycled in weight of of ATP coming from mitochondria. And then all of a sudden, you're gonna have decreased energy production. And depending on where the mitochondria are located, if they're in your brain, for example, you can see mood dysregulation, you can see quirky autistic pandas, pans kind of stuff. You can see learning disabilities. You can see sleep disturbances. So the mitochondria are basically a powerhouse of the cell, and they control absolutely, positively everything. And based on where the dysfunction is in your body, you can have a vast array of different symptoms.
Dr. Aaron, we have kids who have mitochondrial deficiencies. My JC has hypermobility and hypertonia, and you have kids with these same issues. Talk about some of the things you see, and also we discovered it through testing with the immunologist, because our older son, Max, who has PANS, we went to an immunologist and he made the entire family do testing. But it shows up and pairs with a lot of clinical conditions. So we mentioned hypermobility. Talk a little bit about that. And I also want to make sure that I mention, we'll talk about it in multiple times, is that you really just wrote this book called Uncurable: From Hopeless Diagnosis, Defying All Odds. And you go to uncurableBook.com. And what I have learned in this process, even with my own kids, and really helping so many, is it's just really common and people aren't talking about it. And it really can affect our neurodivergent kids, our kids with physical illnesses. So that's a big question, but really, how does it link to so many clinical issues?
Well, first thing, okay, don't let me forget your question. How's it link? Because first I want to just talk about hypermobility, how it's just overlooked. In the medical world, we have an extreme version of called Ehlers-Danlos that you learn about in medical school. It's super rare. You'll never see it. But what they don't talk about is how common hypermobility in general, or generalized hypermobility, is. It's really interesting when you look at studies. About 20% of kids, and this is what boggles my mind, 20% of kids are hypermobile. Then you look at other literature, 12.5% of college students are hypermobile. And then it disappears in adults, and you only talk about ED, Ehlers-Danlos. My thing is, it's still super common, but as you get older, we only super focus on the most extreme version, and we ignore. It's like diabetes, right? You got to wait for your sugar to be so high to be diabetic. But how many Americans are insulin resistant or pre-diabetic? And the answer is 80% of the country has some degree of insulin resistance. And so only focusing on the extreme version means you miss the majority of it. So how does this hypermobility relate to health issues? Well, I refer to hypermobility as the superpower that can become your kryptonite. The first thing is hypermobility. How many athletes have you seen that are hypermobile? I remember watching, it was a couple of years ago, it was University of Nebraska women's volleyball team. They just won nationals, and they're all like doing they slide on the ground, right? And their mouths are wide open. You look at all their fingers are longer than their palms. They're all W sitting, which is when your legs splay out. You kind of semi-dislocate your hips. They open their mouth and they have this elongated facial structure. It's like the entire team is hypermobile, and they can jump higher than anybody else. You can run faster. If you have rubber bands for connective tissue, You're going to be a faster jumper, faster runner, a higher jumper. You're going to be quicker. If your arms are rubber bands, you're going to be able to throw a ball faster. So hypermobility, and it actually has a lot of strategic survival benefits. One part of
Mm.
hypermobility is neurodivergence. Neurodivergence. If you're hypermobile, you have a 400% increased incidence of neurodivergence. Now, when I talk with you about your patients, I feel like everybody I see who has autism, pandas, pans, ADHD, I feel like they're all hypermobile, but if you are hypermobile, your chance of that goes up. Where it comes into play in some of the neurodivergence is individuals that are hypermobile actually have a bigger amygdala and they have a bigger cerebellum. Your amygdala is like your emotional intelligence. It's also intuition, which, can have survival benefits, right? If hundreds of years ago, a mother's intuition could be a difference between the family living or dying kind of thing. And with a bigger cerebellum, that actually is the part of your brain that actually plans both thought and physical activity. So a bigger cerebellum can mean you have the ability to like coordinate thought better, but also physical activity. And so you see a lot of these athletes that are hypermobile that require a lot of coordination, and they have faster reaction times as well. So this is all the amazing stuff about being hypermobile. The problem is if it goes awry and you have a traumatic life event, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, a head concussion, chronic stress, that heightened sense of alertness or awareness flips more to trauma response, overactivation of your sympathetic nervous system. A lot of the advantages of hypermobile tissues also mean you need more vitamin C to repair those tissues because they're more likely to tear. You need more protein. Your need for protein goes up maybe 30 to 50%. And most people, are under, particularly women actually, are under consuming protein, and particular kinds of protein like branched chain amino acids that you get from organ meat and bone broth. And then for your connective tissues to actually heal and work appropriately, you need trace minerals, you need rare earth minerals that our American diets have stripped out. So all of a sudden you have this group of people that elite athletes, and Michael Phelps, if you remember pictures of him, you could like literally take a
Yes.
hand and touch him behind him, and you have this group, but then in the wrong environment, the wrong place, toxins, chemicals, things that disrupt mitochondria, mold, chronic infections like Lyme, this group of people who would be our next Einsteins, our next, brilliant people creating cool things, are having their brains get hyperactivated. They're getting autoimmune issues. They're getting POTS and dysautonomia. They're getting infections. They're getting post-vaccine reactions. And so all of a sudden we see this population that in my mind would have been our next super smart generation of engineers. Because how many of these kids are really super bright, right? It's
Oh
like
my
so many,
gosh, so bright. Yeah.
yeah. But their
Yeah.
brains are getting on fire because of this predisposition, because of the hypermobility. And part of my passion is telling parents about this and going, look, your kid's hypermobile. They might be the next person who makes rockets get caught by arms, right? Or they might be the next sick kid. So you need to have a clean environment, appropriate nutrition, avoid food dyes and colors. It still boggles my mind that, removing petroleum-based dyes from our food is controversial right now. Those kids need all that stuff out. Removing MSG, removing artificial sweeteners. You need to set that kid up for success. If you do, they can be super successful, super brilliant kids, but in the wrong situation, wrong place, wrong time, they come see us, Ro, because they get sick and they get off the path.
Yeah. Or they look like they're ADHD, or they're just dysregulated all the time. They have all those emotional things, as we talked about, the amygdala being more open to things. And I think what people don't understand about hypermobility is just exactly what you said. They're thinking that this is a floppy person. They're not understanding they actually can have this athletic prowess and be more advanced than other people. But I think what is confusing to people is that when you have a mitochondrial difficulty at the very base level, to just understand this, is that your cells don't work efficiently. And when you're talking about extra protein and extra minerals, this isn't just like, oh, yeah, a thing that you're just doing. Oh, we need extra protein. No, this is required for these cells to work properly so that your child can be more focused and process better and less reactive. And we're such a society to more quickly move to psychiatric medications, and yet parents realize they're not really working, when the real root cause for so many kids, and I agree with you, Aaron, I almost never get a kid who doesn't have hypermobility. And it can be just so low level. Some of the things that you might see are handwriting that decompensates, when your child is writing, it gets really large, or you can see over flexibility of the joints. And there's a physical look, because I saw you looking at Giancarlo, you were like, oh yeah, he's really got it. But there's a bit of a physical look that happens for some people. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the subtle signs that people could see? And this isn't the only condition that
100%.
affects our mitochondrial, right? The power of our cells. But I think it's much more prevalent, especially than parents realize. So I'd love for them to better understand what they could be looking for that could be a physical clue that maybe the mitochondrial is really what's breaking down and the source of so many of their issues.
As far as like mitochondrial issues and hypermobility, one of the things you'll see is when kids are standing, well, the physical feature, they tend to have a little bit of elongated neck. The facial wise, you'll see a little bit of elongated face. You look at, the size of your forehead versus your mid face versus your lower jaw. You'll see that their lower jaw appears to be a little smaller than the mid face. And sometimes it's set back a little bit, which can also set them up for upper airway resistance syndrome, which is kids' sleep apnea. Well, right. So, when you look in their mouth, you'll see they have a narrow palate. So their teeth are a little narrow and they have a high arch palate, which again, that pushes up into your airways and makes you more prone to this type of sleep apnea, which again is 100% treatable, but can also cause a lot of neural dysregulation, ADHD kind of stuff. Teeth, you'll have the teeth. There's not enough space in the mouth for teeth to grow, so you actually see like crooked teeth, crowded teeth, and sometimes you talk to someone. Oh, I had to have like 4 to 5 teeth removed when I had my not my dentures, my braces put on, right? And it's because there wasn't space in their mouth for their teeth.
I didn't know this, Aaron. This is new to me. I'm actually super glad you're sharing this because it now becomes another question that I could ask.
Yeah. Well, do you grind your teeth? Part of that teeth grinding is it's one of the ways your body opens your airway at night. There's actually an Inspire new FDA-approved device to treat sleep apnea in adults, and it's a pacer that puts a little thing in implants and actually activates your muscles in your throat to contract to open your airway up when you sleep at night. Well, that's one of the things people will do naturally when you grind your teeth to open those muscles up. As far as your body, one of the things you'll notice is that you tend to see people's arms are longer than they all are tall. And depending on if you're short or tall, sometimes it's harder to pick up. But young ladies, if you go to like a Catholic school or whatever, not, and you have to have skirts, the fingertip right, they'll complain because my skirt is so long. It's because your arms are long and their skirt has to go down. And then you look at their fingers, you'll see their fingers are longer than the palms.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when people like position themselves, you'll see the fingers flip back. I'll watch people when they're writing and you'll see their fingers bend back, their elbows bend back as well. And just standing up straight, you look at their posture, you'll see like if their legs are straight, that they actually flip back, or the way they even stand. That's like a dancer pose that a lot of dancers do. But these people do it naturally, where they put their feet together and their feet just splay out.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they walk, you look how they kind of carry themselves. And the people that are hypermobile, who haven't trained their body, they're kind of clumsy. It's like their body, like, where is it at in space? They bump into stuff. I fling my arms around, and the person who like just reaches and knocks stuff over all the time, right? Or is always bumping into stuff. It's because their bigger cerebellum hasn't been trained. And so the result is they get kind of clumsy. So these are all subtle things that go into it, that when you look at someone, you say, hey, you've got a little hypermobility. And then the mito stuff is all the tone stuff. You fatigue, like the handwriting thing you're mentioning is they fatigue really quick.
Mm-hmm.
You start writing and the writing breaks down because you're fatiguing super easy. Can't stand the hot and the cold. When it's really hot outside and muggy, you fatigue really quickly. You feel sometimes you might even have, and that's where some of the stuff with dysautonomia comes into play. The kid might be just sitting around and all of a sudden their heart races and they feel anxious, or they might wake up at night like scared. They might have more nightmares. It's interesting. Having like night terrors and horrible nightmares is one of the things you'll see with dysautonomia and how your body regulates sleep. And so we'll use, certain medications to block that. There's a whole bunch of, I could keep on rambling and talking about different things. That's kind of like one of my.
But it's interesting because when some of these mitochondrial issues, some of the behaviors that we might see, my experience is that I often see wired or tired. So you talked about being more sensitive to their environment in terms of extremes of heat and cold. I mean, I even see that with my own kid. Like, I think on our other episode, we talked about this previously, that I shared that we had this boat and Giancarlo multiple times had hypothermia because we were like out there and doing stuff. After the second time, I was like, okay, we got ourselves a problem here. And he also doesn't experience pain in the same way. So he's not a complainer. So he like didn't complain. He was pretty little. I learned after that where his brother just didn't, even though he definitely has hypermobility, he just isn't as affected. But we can see these looking tired. You can look like you're ADHD. You can look like you're really having a processing issue. And that's why it's important. I also notice that pretty much all of my teenagers or tweens that develop scoliosis, they
Mm.
all have
Yeah.
hypermobility issues.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is the first time where people realize it.
Yeah, so scoliosis, I didn't mention that, but that is one of the things, part of your brain in your cerebellum in the mid part, that's where you have this tactical map of your vertebrae. And part of the hypermobility thing is you lose that tactical sense in space, and you actually will see more scoliosis in individuals that are hypermobile. And so I'll do an exam on someone, your young teen guy, and he's got a big, and he takes his shirt off, and his chest is sunken in. He's got pectus excavatum. I'm
Yep.
like, okay, you probably got a little scoliosis. And of course he's hypermobile because he got, you can look at the physique. You're 100% correct that there's a correlation there.
Yeah.
I just can only say so many things, but that's,
And scoliosis gets missed. If it's
all the time.
especially if it's like a curvature under 5%, 2%, 3%. People with scoliosis, like if you're, hypermobile and you're an athlete, you're going to be more prone to really having post-concussion syndrome if you have a concussion.
Yeah.
These are the kind of cases that we get where we're putting all the pieces together. Why isn't this kid recovering? And then we work backwards. I've learned these as you have. We've learned these through our patients or people that we're helping. And we're having these conversations because I think a lot of times parents think, well, that's just not my kid. Everybody's got ADHD in my family. Well, in the Hodge family, it's pretty clear to me now that everybody's got hypotonia. You know what I mean? And so I can see it. My husband's cousin is like 6'6", and he has like a neck like a giraffe. And I now see the body, and he's got head learning and they're all dyslexic too. But, I can see the compounding of what sort of happens with these things. And what should parents, now they're like, okay, Roseann, Dr. Rowe and Dr. Aaron, I'm hearing this. What can they do? Are there tests? Are there things that they can do to look out for this? What would be the next step for parents?
Well, that's where it's tricky, because if your kid is just hypermobile and a little quirky and super smart, great at math or great at chess, or my son, Khalil, who's dyslexic and hypermobile, he's great at games, he can move things around his head. Then the focus on those kids is like, you want to minimize future risk. It's when kids tend to get the temperature dysregulation. They tend to get more of the POTS and dysautonomia. They actually start getting legit mitochondrial issues that then testing will show. You can do acetylcarnitine levels and look at their LDH levels to see they're high. You can actually do blood testing that will show they have inefficiency in making energy. That's typically done when the kids are actually sicker. So my point is to educate the moms, look at the physique, and it tends to run in families. It usually is not just one kid. You look at mom, and this is one of the things where that catches people. The parents will be like, well, I'm tight, I'm stiff, like I can't touch my toes. And it's like, okay, could you do that when you were there? Oh yeah, I could used to do that. Now I'm tight. And part of the hypermobility is as you get older, your fascia will tighten down to protect you. And so if people start complaining of back issues, hip issues, a tightness, and it's actually their fascia compensating and not scarring them, but tightening down. And they minimize it because, well, I'm not hypermobile. And it's like, okay, that's where we have to look at different joints and stuff. But as far as testing, the younger kids, there's not really, there's a thing called the Baton, which is a scoring looking at your fingers, your elbows, your thumbs, your knees, and your arm span, and then can you touch your hands in the palm on the ground to look for hypermobility, which is a screen I do. It's also how the skin feels. It's more of early on, it's more of a clinical diagnosis, to be honest with you. If someone doesn't have a health issue, when people come to see me with their Hashimoto's and their IBS, inflammatory bowel, or the post-concussive syndrome, I'm usually diagnosing the hypermobility at that stage. And I'm trying to okay, part of treatment for these illnesses or their autism or their PANS is like, I have to address your connective tissues. And those people's nervous systems are always dysregulated, ramped up. And so whether it's doing rewiring or acupuncture or myofascial work or craniocervical or whatever, you have to do something to calm the system down. So I hear your question, like what testing can be done? And the unfortunate reality is the tests typically don't come back positive till later on. Now, I will mention though, if you do a nutrient evaluation on people,
That was my next question.
okay,
Great.
the vitamin D levels are always low. The
Okay.
vitamin C is low. You'll see low levels of B vitamins, particularly thiamine and riboflavin. You may or may not see, people focus on B12 and folic acid for the MTHFR gene stuff. You may or may not see those levels low, but they have an elevated homocysteine level or an elevated MMA level. But the thing you have to realize as well with the B12 is that a B12 level, for neurological function, a B12 level less than 500 is associated with nerve damage neuropathy. Well, normal is 280 to like 900, right? So for these kids, if they're B12 or 300, I want them closer to 800, right? But you also will see trace mineral deficiencies. You'll see the zinc. And the thing is, you have to look at the labs functionally. If labs are based on 2 standard deviations in the mean, right? Like who wants to be average or normal? But we look at and we say, well, if you fit in, 95% of people have this lab level. It's like, optimal for D actually is closer to 80. Optimal for B12 is probably over 500, closer to 700. And so you have to look at them like that. And so if someone has a zinc or a copper, or I see iodine deficiency all the time. I routinely see it. And if it's the bottom quartile or below, you'll have this nutrient deficiency. When I do a fatty acid, here we go. Okay, you got me on a roll here. So you do.
No, I love this because I think people don't really understand how important these nutrients are and actually how much they can help a kid with focus, with processing, with mood regulation, with their muscles, right? So if you have an athlete, they're not understanding that. And this is such a valuable conversation. So keep it on the roll, Dr. Aaron.
Okay. So, well, you got me sidetracked there because I'm thinking, I know you love your magnesium, right?
I love my magnesium.
And it's like 80% of the population is magnesium deficient, right? And when you have dysautonomia in or POTS or whatever, one of the things your body does to maintain your sodium levels is you diurese magnesium and potassium. And so even if someone's blood level looks to be low, normal, intracellularly, they are massively depleted. And so that's one of those things where you'll see like the magnesium, like, it's okay. You have to get a red blood cell, right? The potassium's like, okay. And it's like, it's, if someone has their anxiety and ADHD related to dysautonomia, their intracellular levels are low. You got to give it regardless of the blood test. But then you'll look at fatty acids. I mean, what's your brain made out of? Made out of fat. Your nerves, and so it's amazing how many as kids you check a cholesterol on them and it's low. It's like 120, 140. Like if you're a male, you want your cholesterol over 140, closer to 170, 180 for adequate testosterone production. I routinely will see autistic kids with 120s, 130s, 140s. It's like if your essential saturated fat levels are low, your brain's not going to function. And you can do an omega-3 index that looks at omega-3s and omega-6s. It's almost always low on these kids. So all of a sudden now it's not just minerals, which are super important. It's getting their fatty acids balanced. And I'll do a more advanced fatty acid analysis that looks for trans fats and lipid rafts and stuff. And they're all a wreck with these kids. And so all of a sudden now, and as you know, for your fatty acids to do what they do and for D to do what it needs to do, you need magnesium. So all of a sudden, it's not just the fat and the magnesium, it's like all this stuff. And these kids routinely have multiple deficiencies. And so like a super easy ground level thing, nutrition wise, eating foods rich in this, but unfortunately you need more than that because of your makeup. And that's also where things like bone broth, organ meat come into play. I learned earlier on in my career that, where you get rare earth minerals and trace minerals as Homo sapiens sapien, right? We get that from eating other things that concentrate it for us. And some of my sickest hypermobile, dysautonomic, whatever kids are my patients who decided to be vegan for a while and got sick and depleted themselves of protein, depleted themselves of minerals and stuff. Because I hate, this is probably political speech. Don't cancel me, but unfortunately, veganism kind of sort of is like, it's become almost its own kind of like philosophy. And people will eat some of the worst food that's super processed.
I couldn't agree more.
Chemicals. And it's like, if you're hypermobile, you are setting yourself up for, and if you're a hypermobile athlete that's vegan, it's like you're setting yourself up for, and then those individuals, to your point, get a concussion. Why does it take my kid forever to get better? Why did concussion result in them getting dysautonomia and all this mood regulation issues, it's because this groundwork was set up that one trigger pushed them over the edge. Or I moved into a
Yeah.
new house, it's moldy, and now, they're
I
crashing out.
mean, so many of my pandas, Lyme folks, my autistics, even my quote unquote complex ADHD mood disorders, they typically have this. And I love that you're talking about the minerals because when we look at what they're deficient in, it's not diagnostic of mitochondrial issues, but it is a pathway to what the next steps are. I think the hardest part is a lot of times people will come to me and say, well, should I ask my pediatrician to run this? Here's the reality. If you're not functionally trained, they have no clinical experience in interpreting those labs. So don't ask an allopathic physician to interpret those labs to understand this. That just has not been my experience. And I've many pediatricians who bring their kids to me, many, and they're like, I don't even understand this. And they have to go to a functional practitioner in order to understand these labs. It's just the reality of what it is. And I want to like yell that from the rooftops. So working with somebody who could look at where are you deficient so you can target it. But that in mind, like I don't give my kids a lot of supplements because our base is our food. However, like John Carlo, both of my kids eat a boatload of meat. I mean, meat and fish, they have it a lot. And we know that you said like upwards of 50% more protein is needed. And then I do micronutrients. I also do mitochondrial support, like a mitochondrial support that has CoQ10, things that actually do it. And then because they eat so much meat, my kids take enzymes because they
Yeah.
need something to help break it down and better utilize it. And of course, essential fatty acids. But I'm not taking a multivitamin. We're not doing that for the kids. The micronutrients are so important for the cell. And of course, magnesium. My kids are taking magnesium.
With AI, anybody can do this. You just take your electron transport chain, you take the tricyclic TCA cycle, which is how your body makes energy, and you just pull it up and you'll see like all these weird things that no one knows what they are, citric acid, and all that kind of jazz, and phosphoenol pyruvate. But you'll see the things between them that make them convert. You'll see vitamin B6, you'll see folic acid, you'll see magnesium, you'll see zinc and selenium. And for all that whole wheel to turn, you need all these little things going into it. And that's stuff that people are routinely, one statistic I quote all the time because it just blew my mind. The average of 40% to 60% of Americans are deficient in any single B vitamin. If there's 12, I've never counted them. I assume there's 12 because, B12, whatever. But like if you've got more than 3 B vitamins in your body, right, you're going to be deficient just by statistical analysis. And you throw on top of the fact that up to, which kind of boggles my mind, up to 100% of Americans are potassium deficient, 80% are magnesium. Yet all this in there, all of a sudden, it's like, this is like a super easy, like it's stupid easy, like get people's nutrients up. And you have to in order for the mitochondria to work. And if you don't get in magnesium, super important. Thiamine is one of the most important B vitamins that there's actually a great book written by a pediatrician at the Cleveland Clinic. It was Dysautonomia, Thiamine Deficiency, and High Calorie Malnutrition. You should actually read it, it's a great read. But the gist is that this high level place, he was finding with a lot of his chronically ill patients, he could use high doses of thiamine to get them better because it was such an important factor in mitochondrial function. And all these kids that he was seeing at Cleveland Clinic were deficient in it.
What we're doing with our cells today, like our kids, we have neurodivergent kids, both of us. We're worried about them right now. But what we're doing today and how we're supporting ourselves is what's going to help us in our 40s and 50s and 70s. We want our kids to have long-term health. And I know a lot of times that we have picky eaters or restricted eaters. And sometimes with our kids with low tone, they have constipation issues, which affect how they're eating. And that's probably because they're eating a lot of fiber instead of protein, which can help them with constipation, which sounds counterintuitive, but low tone even affects your colon. So there's a lot of pieces and how these things work, but at the base, clearly we need micronutrients. I heard thiamine, I heard B6, I heard magnesium, vitamin D, selenium, zinc. Zinc is critical. I see a lot of low zinc. I see a lot of low vitamin D. I would say that's a standard. Almost
Yeah.
nobody comes to me with a normal vitamin D level. And I just don't think people know how important, particularly vitamin D and magnesium, are in terms of what they do in supporting all the functions in the body, and how quickly sometimes getting your levels up when you're eating properly can show in a kid's behavior.
The vitamin D, I just finished reading a book about integrative cancer and looking at D related to that. And I think many traditionally trained physicians were trained to be scared of giving people too much vitamin D because back in 50 years, 100 years ago, we overdosed people on it and gave them too high calcium. But the reality is that vitamin D with K, you need it for appropriate calcium to go in the right places. You want calcium in your bones, not in joints, arthritis, and not in your heart disease. Well, low levels of D, A, E, and K, magnesium. And in order for D to do what it needs to do, you need magnesium. So all of a sudden, there's a symphony of these nutrients for something just as basic as strong bones and teeth, a healthy heart. But the one thing you mentioned about the colon before, I would just throw this out there, is part of hypermobility is you can actually get like sagging of your internal organs. And it's pretty much like a assumed thing. If someone's hypermobile, they'll have some kind of gut issues or IBS. And it's interesting because the antidote for this is physical activity. And what are all the kids doing right now? They're sitting at computers, sitting inside. So it's like, I think about my dog. I let my dog outside. He runs it around and he goes to the bathroom, right? They need physical activity. Well, we all need physical activity, but specifically the hypermobile, because your organs sag a little bit. If you don't get that, you're prone to stasis. You're prone to bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, SIBO, dysbiosis. And then, all of a sudden, 75% of all neurotransmitters are made in your gut. So now that gut issue results in brain inflammation. And so that's, I think there's so many reasons why being outside and being active are good for all these kids. But one of the hidden secrets, let's say, is the fact of how it affects motility in your gut, which affects everything else downstream.
And I have such a huge difference in every single clinical issue I work with, mental health, neurodivergence, when people have physical activity. And it could be, this doesn't have to be joining a gym or necessarily being a support. I have like a moderately functioning autistic, and he actually walks or runs every single day. And his level of functionality is much higher than I would expect. And it is very clear to me and his parents that that is the reason why. And he does 4 miles. I'm not telling you to do 4 miles, but even in my own life, I'm talking about this all the time. I am constantly now doing as little as 2 minutes, but kind of up to 15 minutes. But I would say on average, 5 minutes of micro exercise throughout my day. It has changed my life, Dr. Aaron. It just gives you a different level of energy. It's lowering my insulin levels, but it's really improving detoxification, because when you have mitochondrial issues, your cells don't have efficiency. And that also means, like, part of this kids that are sick or constipated, they're dealing with some kind of chronic medical something, is that they're not detoxifying. For people that are new to detoxification, we must detoxify or we recycle those toxins back in our system. And we just have a lot more kids with PANS and PANDAS and autism and all these other things. Mitochondrial issues affect us in multiple ways. And I probably gave like the very elementary version of that. It is right. Detoxification is such a huge part of this problem as well.
People don't realize that in order for our veins our veins have very, very small muscles around them. They require, like in your legs, require your leg muscles to pump for the blood to be pushed up in your legs, coming back to your heart. But your lymphatics require healthy fascia and movement activity for them to work appropriately. And so just being outside, moving and walking, that bouncing actually can help detoxify. And people don't understand that for your lymphatics to work appropriately. I mean, people, I think, know what lymphatics are. Lymphatic drainage requires you actually to move. I mean, that could be massage as well, which is one of the reasons why massage is a great way to detoxify, and how massage affects your nervous system. 80% of the nerves in your fascia are sensory, meaning they're feeding back to your central nervous system. And so all of a sudden, massage, myofascial work, but people forget that when you're physically active and running, you actually are kind of jostling, jogging, and shaking your fascia. And so physical activity does, and then there's the whole thing, you make these things called myokinins, which are cytokines made by muscle activity, which actually stimulate brain development and brain interdigitation or branching out of neurons or stimulated by the muscles making this hormone that goes to your brain. So physical activity, it's like it's a superfood. It's a super nutrient. It's a biohack. And our bodies were kind of made to move. It's just, and you have a movement deficiency. You know, what is it? They saying sitting is the new smoking. But particularly these kids that are dysregulated, movement is so calming to their nervous systems. Being outside is so calming. And to put those kids in a square room with a screen in front of them, it's like throwing gas on the fire. No wonder they kind of go home and are wonky, because they've been sitting down in front of screens all day long.
It's the new babysitter. I went to a Shishu Poo Poo restaurant that's up by me, and it's called the Winnevin. It's one of the I think it's the #1 spa in America.
Oh, wow.
And let's just say it was crazy expensive, but we went for my friend's birthday and she deserved it. Unexpected divorce. So we're there. There's only us and 2 other, tables. And I was like, wow, that kid is so well behaved. I almost went up to them. It was a little kid. It was like maybe a 2-year-old. Almost went up to them and said, hey, I'm Dr. Roseann. I just want to give you a shout out. Great job. And then I realized he was on a device the entire time. I thought to myself, first of all, how brave of you to bring your kid to like an ungodly expensive restaurant. But then I was like, why? Like, why? Because you're here for yourself, because you've got your kid on this. It's very controversial. People in the neurodivergent community get mad and say, well, they need it. And it helps them to regulate, but that's really not true, because there's going to be another side to it. And that doesn't take the place of exercise. We know through clinical research, a minimum, if you do 3 times a week, 30 minutes of moderate exercise, it reduces ADHD symptoms by 40%. I don't think medication can even do that. And so how can you do that? How can you integrate it, right? Can you go for a family walk? Can you, make it simple? Like we in my house, my kids, like I'm, crazy with all these exercises now. I'm like, we're having a squat off, and we do squats. And I'm also into the marching. So I do 100, and I'm like, okay, who's going to do it faster? And, I gamify it. And yes, I know my kids are like, my friend AJ's like, oh man, the Hodge boys are into the Chris and Roseann program. But, they feel differently, and they know that it helps them. It's just part of what we do as a family, but you have to get your butt moving. I mean, 40% of American adults are completely sedentary. No activity. Not surprised, Dr. Aaron.
Yeah, it's a crazy number, but I'm not surprised. No.
Let's set our kids up for success, especially when they have behavioral issues and mood issues. And, we're here talking, so many of our families and individuals that we see are living in overwhelm. And I want to talk a little bit about your book, and Uncurable: From Hopeless Diagnosis to Defying All Odds, because it's about your daughter, Anna, who you adopted. And I want to hear a little bit about her story. But I think what I really want people to know before you go into her story is that her story is continuing to evolve. And there's no one miracle thing. And we're having these conversations on this show because there are supplements that can help. There are activities that can help. PEMF can help. There's lots of things. And a lot of times people will get so much better really quick with me. And they're like, how much longer do I have to do these nutrients? And I'm like, this is helping. Why are we talking about stopping? In Anna's story, tell us a little bit about Anna. I know you talked about her before on a previous episode, but tell us a little bit about it, because this is an awesome, incredible story.
My Anna was, her birth mother did crystal meth throughout the entire pregnancy. She had a stroke before she was born. She was born functionally blind and was born with this thing called agenesis of the corpus callosum, which is basically the part of your brain that connects the left and right wasn't there. And so had a pretty poor prognosis. The expectation was she'd never walk, talk, or crawl, and that she'd be a vegetable for the rest of her life. And my wife, Becky, was her OT that started taking care of her when she got out of the hospital, and from 6 weeks of age all the way up till we brought her into our house when she was about 12 months old. We brought her into our house. I was like, hey, let's do the best we can. Let's start feeding her, et cetera, doing the best I could at that point in time. Saw her pediatric GI doctor. And this is like, I talk about the inflection point in the book where, like, because part of the story is also how I went from a regular doctor to doing this kind of functional, integrative, translational, whatever you mean. I could call it good medicine, but how to get into this pathway. And her GI doctor was like, and I'm sure you've had this experience with some of your clients, patients, that They said she was too small for her size. And the way they were going to fix it was to put a feeding tube into her to feed her and bypass her mouth. Well, Becky, we had conversations. Chewing and swallowing is a part of brain development, it's a part of speech development. Even though she's never supposed to talk, we had greater hopes for her. Putting a feeding tube also affects how you crawl. You can't learn to walk if you got a feeding tube in. And so again, she was never supposed to walk. And so we just opted not to do those procedures. And so this was the first inflection point. I'm a physician, I'm a doctor. At that point in time, I was a captain, later a major in the Air Force. My wife is a pediatric occupational therapist. So what they do to us, I got reported, Roe, to Child Protective Services for child neglect because I refused to do a medical procedure. Instead, wanted to give my daughter real food. So that was the first like inflection point in my career, in my mind. Like the system doesn't like it when you say no to their plans. The second inflection point that led me down this whole crazy pathway was 6 months later that Becky found a growth chart with kids with cerebral palsy. So they actually have a special growth chart for kids with my daughter's condition. And that one, she was in the middle. She was normal. She was 50th percentile. So the specialist had no idea this chart existed. And for me, it was like my aha moment was the experts don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to become my daughter's expert because no one else is going to do it. They're just going to recommend more surgical procedures, which is what happened years and years later, or kept on happening for years. But so I spent hours getting up 4 a.m. researching, and there wasn't a whole lot of research at that point in time on cerebral palsy or crystal meth exposure. So I started researching chemical exposures and autism because there's a lot of information about that. And so just started learning and applying it to my daughter. And one of the first things was actually doing genetic testing on her to see genetically what nutrients deficiency she was susceptible for, and then giving her those nutrients. But the inflection point for us was the system didn't like it when we pushed back, and then actually they didn't know. And so for me, I just realized I had to become the advocate for my daughter. I had to figure it out. And that's what I encourage people to do, is to become your own advocate, because there's so many times you'll run into a specialist who doesn't know how to interpret labs, or, with POTS or dysautonomia, it says it's all in their head. It's just an anxious little girl, or, ADHD, fibromyalgia is a psychiatric disorder, right? They minimize people's symptoms, and you need to work with someone who's not going to do that.
So critical. First of all, I get the privilege of spending time with Anna, and she is honestly so observant and as sharp as a tack. And you do have her walking, and she's participating in life, and boy, is she full of energy and so excited about so many things. It's because of the micro steps you've done over time. And Anna is what changed your whole world. I mean, even your family world, but also your professional world. And she made you dig deeper into every other client. And, I'm certainly grateful for that. I always want to leave people with hope and inspiration. I had one of my moms who I work with one-on-one in our program. And if you want to work with me, you can go to drroseann.com/help. And, she said to me, I struggle with being hopeful. And she was like, I listened to your shows. She was like, even your signatures bring me hope. And she was just thanking me for that. And we are here. I always say we're walking the walk. We don't just talk. Our kids, I'm grateful for the changes that my uniquely wired kids have brought into my life. And not that I wasn't already a person who believed in natural things, but it's taken it to the next level, and it's made me prioritize nervous system health, regulating first before everything else. And when we are, as a parent, and we're choking with overwhelm, and we're choking with fear, which Dr. Hartman and I were talking before our podcast, just the consciousness of the world is people choking on fear. I just want to assure you that you can start with one thing and stick with it for 30 days and then start integrating more. Nutrition, nutrients, and nervous system health are non-negotiables in your health and long-term sustained wellness, right? Because we don't just want your kid to be okay for right now. I want them to be thriving. I get to see all these kids that I work with that are adults. I'm going to lunch with one of the moms next week, that somebody that I saw 13 years ago, and I got to hear all these amazing things that this kid is doing. And I want that for everybody. And I really do believe that in my heart. And I know Aaron does too, right? Like, he just doesn't believe that people can't get better. And there's always a way to figure that out. We're not always available to people. This is why we do our podcast. This is why, Aaron has his book, right? And you can get Uncurable from Hopeless to Diagnosis, Defying All Odds. Go to uncurableBook.com. I'll have this in the notes. But you got to move your coolie, as Philomena would say, and you got to take action. You can't just get stuck in your analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
You really do have to jump in and then stick with it.
The purpose of the book was like, if this little girl could do it, you can do it too. And that's a big part of the book. But if Anna can do it, you can do it too. And we have other stories of other patients who've had amazing outcomes. But to your point, like, we do share a lot of the little nuances and things we did. And everything was built, yes, we did hyperbaric and stem cells and exosomes and peptides and cerebral light, all that kind of stuff. But the foundation was diet, exercise, sleep, appropriate nutrition, a clean, safe environment. It's like, I can't underemphasize how important using food like a drug. We would make mayonnaise out of stuff called body balance oil, which was an imbalanced omega-3 to 6, to change the lipids in our brain. And they would just put mayonnaise on the stuff. Maybe we'd make homemade, now I know everybody can't do nuts out there, but we'd make homemade granola out of nuts. And so all of a sudden now they're getting their omega-3s and omega-6s. They're getting all these trace minerals in the granola that's grain-free granola, right? And so we literally used food like a drug to help her, to help Abigail, to help Khalil, to help all their brains and bodies heal. We have 3 kids we adopted, and they all have very similar crazy stories. And the foundational stuff, diet, exercise, these were the foundations upon which all the cool fancy stuff worked.
Doing your best to be regulated as yourself, because this is very distressing. Every parent has an ability to regulate, regardless of what trauma history is. Everybody can break that path. That pattern doesn't have to still be there for people. But I love our conversations. You are the only repeat guest. We are a resident detective doc, Dr. Aaron. And you will be back again. I told you in my house, it's Dr. Aaron, then it's Jesus, and then it's mom. Like, if you say something, my kids are like, well, Dr. Aaron said that. Remember the butter?
I think you get the first 2 flipped there. You get this a little out of order there, but I appreciate the honor.
My kids, everybody, it's a Raz city now. Now they, just FYI, John Carl's learning ASL, and he'll be taking it for the next 3 to 4 years. So now they do sign language jokes about mom now. So it's pretty funny. Wait till the next time we see you. But thank you so much.
Let your kids, we're going to talk behind mom's back in sign language. That's so awesome.
It's not just my kids. It's John Carlo and Mr. Hodge doing this and stuff. It's really pretty funny. Such a privilege to have you on, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. Everyone, go back and re-listen to this episode. Take notes. We'll have the show notes. Get his book. Be hopeful. Always have hope, and see the change happening, and it's going to happen. Thank you, everybody. Want more insights and solutions? Well, subscribe to our Dysregulation Insider, and it will show up in your inbox every week.